Okay, hi. I'm Mobina Shafkat, and I will be your moderator for this book launch. I think I would like to start by welcoming you all. It is really lovely to stand here and look across and see our student body and also our very esteemed faculty, and I think also a fair number of our contributors. So, the book looks like this. Its title is also right there. So it's literary and non-literary responses towards 9/11, and it goes from South Asia and beyond. The book in concern, which I've already introduced, contains a diverse range of articles written by scholars in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the UK, and the USA. And it has been collected, the articles have been collected and edited by our lovely Dean of Humanities and Associate Professor for English, which is Dr. Nukhbah, and you will all get to hear her shortly. I really like this book because each of the articles examines the horrifying event of 9/11. And it's rooted in the idea that 9/11 is not just something that happened in the US, it's something that's had a global impact and one that has led to major socio-political ramifications across the world. Some of the approaches that our scholars have adopted are anthropological, some are literary perspectives, some are philosophical, some are historical, and some are even artistic. But each of them, I think, enriches our understanding about the event of 9/11, and I think it has a lot to offer. And with that said, I think we are very fortunate to have our rector, Dr. James Tebby, and I would be so happy to invite him on stage, and maybe if he'd like to share some of his thoughts, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad to be able to be here. I know about this project, and I know about some of the things that went into the formation of it, different parts of it. And then I was just looking now at the program and looking at the list of contributors, and pleased to know that I know a lot of them, and a number of them are here as well. And I think, oh, that's nice. And so I look forward to reading it. I've not read it, but I very much look forward to reading it here. I would like to make a couple of comments about 9/11 from a personal perspective. I think that probably, I don't know about you here, but in the United States anyway, everyone would be able to remember when they first heard about this event that took place. It would be considered such a traumatic event that at that time they'll remember, I remember where I was, I remember what I saw, I remember how I heard about it. And I can remember, I wasn't in the US, I was in Cyprus. We were actually doing there was this big leadership retreat, and there were people from Egypt, Egyptians, and a whole bunch of different nationalities, and it was a leadership development thing for NGOs that we were running in a hotel up in the mountains a little ways in Cyprus, and my wife, who had been taking people to and from the airport, was the one that said, "Oh, I've been hearing on the news that this has happened." So we went out and asked that they turn on the TV, and the hotel had this big, huge TV that had the panels on the wall, so it took up one whole wall in that, and they put that up, and we stood there and we watched the events, the planes hitting the tower, and there was a sense of not knowing what was going to happen, what had happened, what was going to happen in the future, so much uncertainty and a change that came. And afterwards, when I thought about it, I thought, this is just the United States finding out what the rest of the world experiences all the time. We've been isolated from it, and whatever happens in other countries and other places. And now, for once, something happens here, and this is an opportunity for them to experience that. And it will be a blip, and it will disappear, and it will go away. But in retrospect, that isn't really what's happened. What's happened is that it has had an enormous impact in the world indeed. And not just for the lives that were lost there, but into the psyche of the nations and what kinds of things changed. Whole lifestyles changed as a result of this. So many different things can be traced back to 9/11. And right now they're trying to resolve a 17-year-old war in Afghanistan. And why did that come about? Well, because of 9/11. And some of us, and I think many of us sitting here would say, well, you know, the war in Afghanistan, 9/11 would never have happened if things hadn't happened before. You know, if the same amount of energy and attention had been given to reconstruction and to education and to other things in Afghanistan and with Afghan refugees, rather than simply fighting and stopping terrorism, the same amount of money, one fraction the amount of money that's gone into the war on terrorism, had that been put into reconstruction, we never would have had a 9/11. There would have been a different kind of thing that's happening. I mean, so people, that's sort of the thinking that I have as we look at that. And so what you're getting is a non-literary response to 9/11 right now from me, from a perspective that we've seen here. I know in the U.S. in the churches it became a big thing. Suddenly everybody started going to church for 2 or 3 weeks, and then immediately it stopped after that, you know. And but there was, and you would think that it would just go away, but somehow it has affected us. And there is even one lovely humorous memory of how this 9/11 event directly affected FC College. When I came here, I took advice from people around me all the time about different things that we could do, and my advisors told me that it was perfectly possible to have a parking lot over here that had kitty, you know, the brick dust on the parking lot. He says, you can put that down and it will pack down and it will just be perfect and you don't have to pave it. And I thought, here's an inexpensive way of getting a parking over here. So we got this brick dust for almost nothing. The people were happy from the kilns to deliver huge trolleyfuls of this brick dust down there. We put it down, and I instructed Kakan, and in military style, he lined up the lines for where cars would park and instructed his people, and all of our people started parking there, and it was terrible. We did it for 1 week in May, and the dust came up, and people would walk from the parking, and they're coming in, they're just covered in dust, absolutely covered in dust. It was filthy dirty. And then on Facebook, somebody had put a picture of a businessman with his suit and with his briefcase who was completely covered in dust, and it was from 9/11. It was a picture from 9/11 when, you know, when and he was coming down, and it said, I parked at FC College's new parking. This was on the Facebook that got circulated from 9/11. And I saw that, I thought, that's enough. You know, we canceled the parking arrangement. We said, we will do whatever we need to make it paka and put in the brickworks for that. And I was misadvised by my advisors on that. That wasn't successful at all. I don't know why they thought that that was a good idea, because I've never seen that work anywhere, but on that. So these are some of the things that are here. But I would like to say this. My appreciation goes to Dr. Nukhbah for the amount of work that has gone into this. Being an editor is a big job. It's not a small job. It's a big job. And those who've done that job know exactly what's involved in it. You're gathering these. I tried it for a small a small book that I put together from a number of different writers, and it was a terrible business getting their contributions in, and it was small, really on a small scale. And this is an enormous job getting it in, getting the essays in there right, and making sure that the English is good, and that the content is of up to a standard and is being done. So a great appreciation goes to you, Dr. Nukhbah, for the work that you've done in putting into this, and it makes us all proud that this is being done. And the subject matter, I think, is a very, very interesting subject, and because there's a wide variety of responses that have affected us in a wide variety of ways. So my congratulations to all of you who've participated in this, and it's a wonderful time for a book launch. And as I say, I look forward to reading it very soon, and seeing what some of the literary and non-literary responses are in this here. So thank you for organizing this. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tevi, for sharing those memories. And also, I think they were just so very insightful. And I think it's a great way to warm up this book launch. Next, we have a short talk by Dr. Janelle Curry. Dr. Janelle Curry is the outgoing provost at Gordon College in Boston. She came to the Foreman Christian College and University in the fall semester as a Fulbright specialist, and then she returned as a consultant on several curricular and administrative projects this semester. So we're very happy to have her. Dr. Curry holds a PhD in geography from the University of Minnesota, and she has served as a provost, as I mentioned, at Gordon College. She's also been the Dean for Research and Scholarship at Calvin University. She has held the Fulbright Fellowship to Canada and Hong Kong, and in addition to Pakistan, and she's published extensively on issues at the intersection of society and environment, women in leadership, and national and community level social paradigms. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you very much for inviting me to do this. As somebody from the West and who's a visitor among you, it's a great honor to be able to share my perspectives on this book and some comments. I wanted to both draw some themes out on the book and also share some of my observations on those themes. And the purpose of the book is really to present a multi-layered analysis of the responses to 9/11 through different disciplinary lenses. And it really has reminded us, just as Dr. Tebi did, that history did not start at 9/11, even though, your emotions would tell you they did, and often the press will act like you did. There was a lot that came before, and a great deal that's come since, and this book helps remind us of that. And also throughout the volume, we're reminded that vast generalizations are not helpful in the context of the scale that people live their lives. So the volume illustrates the ways in which the events have led to further simplification of our understanding of society, underlain by a framework of bifurcation between the West and the Muslim world. And Kamal Uddin argues in this book that this includes the ethnocentric creation of an image of Islam that is antithetical to Western concepts of modernity, tolerance, and rationality. Among the simplifications is also the assumption that culture and state are synonymous, and that the divides are thus drawn along those lines. All these assumptions and generalizations keep us from being able to set aside simple characterizations of cultures and states and replace them with relationships that help us develop more complex views of each other. One author, Charles Ramsey, roots this bifurcation of the world in an essentialist depiction of religion that ignores socio-religious traditions and thus simplifies religious phenomena. If this is true, then both sides of this bifurcated world end up being simplified by the narrative. Mobina here discusses in her chapter how the otherness categorization reinforces itself on both sides of the divide. For example, one chapter describes how the fatwa propagated by bin Laden assumed a unity across nations by faith and assumes that Muslim identity is homogeneous and thus creates a coherent other category for the West, while the West does the same thing of itself in its own documents and policies, making it appear to be homogeneous. And I would argue that in the United States, there are similar instances where religion is used as a tool to express political discontent, and that these are not clearly understood by the liberal press or policymakers as well within my own country. So our understanding of ourselves is not nuanced in the West, let alone our understanding of others. Nukhbah explores how local Islamatization and international Islamophobia thus reinforce each other. Both equate nationality with religion, and this level of generalization stigmatizes and stereotypes rather than challenging us all to be honest and explore all the nuances of our own heritage and history. And I call that learning deeply. And she asks us what genres can lead to deep cultural dialogue. Two of the chapters then explore expressions of the experience of this divide in more popular culture through the connection between truck art and drones, and you've been seeing pictures of them up there, and also Bollywood. Madeline Clements asks us to think more deeply on the question of how 9/11 has perhaps impeded the original vision of Pakistan as a multi-religious nation and made it difficult for Pakistani Christians to claim their national identity. I would argue that this bifurcation of the world has also led Americans to be blind to the multiple religious identities within other countries. And that even includes being blind to the long history and existence of Palestinian, Syrian, and Iraqi Christians. While 9/11 has led to an increased strength of the bifurcated view of the world, Julie Flowerday reminds us that the impacts are always expressed at the local level and vary based on local circumstances. She describes how 9/11 shifted the geographic direction of influence in the Hunza region of the West, from the West to China. In the midst of larger global conflict, opportunities arise for other players at the local level and greatly influence the lives of people groups. And I would argue that the groups that tend to be on the cultural and geographic margins are the ones that are often more vulnerable and impacted by these global shifts. So the question that I am left with, how do we build a social imagination that bridges the bifurcation and creates a multifaceted view of ourselves and of others? I believe that we each need deep historical and honest integration of our own traditions into our own present understanding of ourselves. This needs to be done with the recognition of our groundedness in our various communities while knowing that traditions are living things and not static. Communities have agency, and communities need agency in negotiating their lives through change. The challenge from my perspective as an American Christian is that the individualistic worldview of segments of Western society see identity formation coming from individual self-actualization and not from belonging to a community. Within this very individualistic segments of my society, communities of belief or commitment are seen as barriers to identity formation rather than sources of understanding of ourselves. This is a fundamental discussion that needs to take place in the West to bring this assumption to the forefront. Renowned sociologist of religion Peter Berger, at the end of his long career, offered a new social paradigm for the West, based on pluralism rather than the inevitability of secularization. In fact, he spent most of his career assuming that secularization would happen, and then at the end of his career, he decided that it wasn't going to happen, and he went in a different direction. Pluralism, according to Berger, is the social situation where people with different ethnicities, worldviews, and moralities live together and interact amicably with one another, recognizing the differences in religions and the coexistence of religious and secular discourses. This paradigm is not built on avoidance or separation or attacking personal motives, but on negotiation. He asks us to hold on to each other, staying locked in dialogue as we negotiate our relationships. This approach requires us to focus on how we work together rather than on the imposition of an agreed-upon set of beliefs, always with the common goal of peaceful coexistence that serves the common good. This peaceful coexistence requires that West and East both become honest about the differing communities of commitment within their midst. They are a fact of reality and are not going to disappear, as Berger points out. So perhaps the question is not, as the author of one chapter stated, can Islam be made secular, democratic, and pluralistic, but can our societies allow for the existence of different communities within our boundaries that can all hold a common national identity while belonging to different religious traditions? This is the question for both Western and Muslim-dominated societies. And honesty and humility are called for in these discussions. One chapter challenged me to think about my own views of traditional Islamic education. So often in the West, the press will portray it as the sources for terrorism. And as an American Christian, or a Christian, I believe Christian education as a component of the solution to terrorism, and I need to think about Islamic education in the same way. So at the time of 9/11, many of us in the United States hoped that the question, why do they hate us so much, would lead to more self-reflection and deeper understanding on the part of Americans. I can't make a generalization about whether this has happened or not, but certainly on the surface, it would appear to not be the case. But as this volume says again and again, it is at the personal level that dialogue takes place. I do know someone in San Diego that meets with an interfaith group at the local YMCA with no agenda other than to get to know each other. I know of someone else who is part of a coalition that addresses issues of Islamophobia at the state level in South Dakota. My own Christian church in Grand Rapids, Michigan has been bringing its members together with those from a local mosque for meals. These are the places where I look for hope. And I know that our lives are intertwined, and who we become is tied to how we are going to negotiate our understanding of ourselves and others. At the end of this volume, the World Trade Tower site is described as being experienced as an absence. It is a black hole. I really resonate with that image of all of us standing around that hole, waiting to see what and who is going to fill it up. We wait to see who steps forward to fill the gaping hole. We can't let others fill it in. We need to begin to fill it in with an honest and nuanced narrative, just as this book has started to do. So thank you to all the authors for their contributions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Curry, for not just, I think, a scathing, but also a very stimulating critique of how we perceive the world just before, post 9/11. And I really admired the way that you talked about how chapters in the book made you reflect. And I really admired the way that you shared your own thoughts about where to look for places for hope. And I think that's a really, really strong message. And with that, I think let's talk a little bit about the contributors who've each shared one of their articles. Let me start by mentioning those who are not able to join us here physically. I think the only person who we will not be hearing from today is Professor Madeline Clements. She's a research lecturer in English studies at Seaside University, but I think she was on maternity leave and unable to send a message. We do have a voice recording, like a video recording, from Dr. Deba Mitrakar, She's the assistant professor at Women's College in Calcutta. We also have a video message from Dr. Halima Muhammad Ali. She is a senior lecturer at the University Sans Malaysia. She's given a written message, I'm sorry. We have a video message from Dr. Charles Ramsey, who's a professor at Baylor University. And lastly, we also have a written message from Professor Marshall Saif, who is at Clemson University in the US. But for those of us who are here, and for those who will be speaking today, let me start with Dr. Nukhbah Langa. She is the associate professor for English, and she's also the dean for humanities. If you'd like to come on stage, that would be fantastic. We also have Dr. Julie Flowerday joining us today. She is the professor of sociology, again here at Foreman Christian College University. Dr. Julie Flowerday, if you'd like to. Yeah. Dr. Kamaluddin, who is the professor, again, for the English department and also the chairperson. If you'd like to come on stage, that would be fantastic. Yeah. And lastly, one of my, I think, own mentors, Dr. Reconciles, who is the assistant professor here, again, at the English department at Foreman Christian College. Thank you. Dr. Nukhbah, if you'd like to start us off. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking Dr. Tebby. He's not here anymore, but he took time out to come and join us, Professor Janelle Curry, and all my seniors, particularly Dr. Sikandar, Dr. Shafkat, and Dr. Wasim, and all my esteemed colleagues and contributors for being here. Sorry, I'm being too formal, but it's an important occasion for me. So I must thank, and also my colleagues from other institutions who've made an effort to join us. I'm going to not take too much time because, I think I write better than I speak. So if you're interested more in the book, better read it. But I would really like to say a few things about the methodological approaches in the book and how the vision and how we conceived the idea. And I've talked about it at length in the introduction of the book as well. So there is something simple behind it, and then there is something really complicated behind the project. The simple thing is really experimenting with how we are going to edit and compile, and work on a book project collectively, collaboratively, because working on monograph is much more our own mind and being in command of the project. But working in an edited work is like working with so many different minds and experimenting with ideas. So this is kind of a simplistic definition, but the complicated definition is that I think the book is an outcome of the traumatic experiences that I had in the West, really, to be honest. And it's been piling up for years, like studying in the UK and going through experiencing racism and then coming back to Pakistan, then starting to work in FC, going to the US and then experiencing a different kind of racism. So actually, when 9/11 happened, I was in Pakistan and I remember being glued to the television watching these BBC news about war on terror. And it was amazing. I was also expecting my first child. She's here, luckily today, to give me moral support. So, it was very traumatic. I was very traumatized. I've never watched news for that long. I used to be in front of television watching BBC and CNN and what's the update on war and terror. But who would have imagined, there would be a book coming out of this experience. But the second experience that I had was when I started my PhD, and then 7/7 and some terrorist attacks happened in the UK as well. And the last experience, last but not least, was when I joined FC, and due to academic interactions, I had started traveling to the US for the first time. And it was quite traumatizing because, it was worse than the UK because, if you have a Pakistani passport and a brown skin, you had to go through this scrutiny and you were taken aside and you were asked certain questions. People would be searching your ID. And the whole dialogue and discourse about 9/11 in the US itself. So in fact, it was, the project was a student-faculty collaboration through GLA that we started this project on, and Mubina was we're lucky one of our students is contributing. She was our student, and she joined the trip. But it was really an outcome of these questions that people asked me in Washington and New York, that, we are amazed that Pakistani women also study up to PhD level and they can speak good English and they can travel on their own. And I thought, which world are we living in? Because even in the UK in the 90s, in 2000, I was in University of Kent, and people used to ask, do you sleep on a bed? Do you have roads? And, I used to think, okay, either I am from a different planet or something has gone wrong with the world. So I feel these are traumatic experiences in our lives. When we are traveling, we are enjoying, but at the same time, when you face racism and when you face cultural barriers and when you face discriminations or at cultural, religious or racial levels, these things pile up. And I think that is my comment on the methodology used in this book, although there are more contributors, but that is why I decided that, these experiences are like ethnography for me, and they have to be translated into academic expressions. So hence we used an eclectic approach and, combining humanities and social sciences. And a lot of Dr. Julie Fraverde, for instance, uses ethnographic approach. So I think the objective overall is to convey to researchers and literature that if you are a literature student, you don't have to stick to textual analysis and one kind of methodology, but you should also, if you break these stereotypical barriers that this is my discipline, this is my methodology, you gain much more out of it. So hence this moves us to the conceptual concerns of the book, which as Professor Curry has very nicely summarized, that we do talk a lot about not just literary text, but about the image. And the discussion on image starts with the discussion on the image of the US that is created after 9/11. And there are interesting terms in that book used, for instance, ephemeral memorials that the US created, and when you see the American nationalism or American identity being reasserted through the American flags hanging in the windows of flats in New York, or if Twin Towers, there is a special place given to Twin Tower in the American modern history. So, these symbols kind of overwhelm the world in the sense that how we feel towards 9/11 got pushed into the background. And hence I thought, I think this is really important for us, because Muslim identity or Christian identity, in fact as well, even in majority Muslim countries, these being a student of post-colonial studies, these identities have become so complicated, and they are boxed and doubly boxed again and again. And if these terms coming out from the West as jihad or terrorism or Islamic fundamentalism or Muslim identity, or why do Muslims have beards, or why do they wear a hijab, these questions are kind of challenging our identities and complicating things. So just to wind up, I don't want to take the time of other contributors. This book is a kind of a dialogue. And I feel that it also kind of reflects back on books like The Reluctant Fundamentalist, where Mohsen Ahmed has created this character who is in a state of dialogue with the American policymakers. So in a sense, this book resists that, everything, political differences can be resolved through policies only, and without appreciating each other's cultures and the complexities within those cultures. So one of the things, for instance, that's why this book argues that, looking at Islam as a monolithic block is a kind of limiting the understanding of Islam. So I'll let my esteemed colleagues say more about this. With this, I thank you all again, and I'm deeply touched and grateful that all of you have made such an effort to encourage us and be here today. Thank you.
This is a rather difficult topic for me to discuss, and at the same time, I was really grateful to Dr. Nukhbah for the opportunity of writing a chapter. Difficult because I was actually in Hunza when 9/11 happened. I still have difficulty talking about it. I'll do my best, but I was actually there and watched and rewatched the falling down of the buildings. And so I had 3 different perspectives. One was my own, where after leaving Pakistan and returning to America, I went to universities and institutions, to churches, and they would show pictures of the people from Hunza. And one of the nicest reactions was, well, they're just like us. They're no different. And that was really powerful. Then I saw the Pakistan government. The government had initially presented a picture of what I was doing there in 2001, which was a photography exhibition. And the photography exhibition was using photographs which were taken in the 1930s by a British colonial agent, and then myself in the 1990s. And so the difference was extraordinary and yet very ordinary. And it was that focus of the ordinary, extraordinary that was the topic, the theme of the photographs. And the government was very happy because at that time there was a lot of hope that Gilgit-Baltistan would become the 5th province of Pakistan. And it was only in 1994, by the way, that the Supreme Court had turned away the option of settling the dispute by saying it's really up to India and Pakistan. So emotions were high, and at the same time, the government was looking to development, that is, to the idea of bringing in infrastructure, education, and really consumership, that people would now have the ability to buy so many of the things they saw down country or they associated with developed countries. So the government had its view. And then the third view was the people. And that always catches me. The people were, at that time, really hopeful that they would be regarded as true Pakistanis. They were Muslim. Their children sang the anthem every morning. They said a prayer to Pakistan. They had sent their sons and brothers and husbands as irregulars into service for Pakistan. So there was a lot of hope. But at the same time, when 9/11 happened, I had left Hunza, and some years and things had happened before Dr. Nukhbah had asked me to write this chapter. And so I went back to thinking about the people and how they had survived through this. For them, New York. It was a faraway place. For them, what happened in their lives was what mattered. They had experienced hope that had crumbled in their vision. They had imagined a good deal of prosperity and development and changes, and they had actually experienced 2005 earthquake in Kashmir that had left families totally devastated because children lost in the collapse of buildings. And yet the people of Hunza the men had actually gone to Kashmir and taken jobs. So they made money off of something that was a disaster in another area. But this was something that had to happen because in order for them to survive, many had sold their own lands to get money enough to pay for their children to continue in school, to feed their families. And so the ordinary day-to-day life in Hunza was hardly celebratory and hardly the stuff that would make bannerline headlines, news, or whatever. I found the topic difficult at first to approach because my own, as you could see how I have an emotional issue, I wanted to look at it institutionally. I wanted to look at something that was cold and distant and detached so that I could manage it. But I found I couldn't do that. It wasn't true to the people. So I actually relied on conversations, on telephone exchanges, only a few on email because there are always issues of other people reading emails and, for that matter, listening to telephone calls. There were ways of, in any case, of sharing news and getting information. And what I began to learn was how their lives had taken so many different directions, and that at that moment in time, they saw a prospect with China, and that this whole notion of development that had come out of the West and had appeared in a bannerline type presentation wasn't real. But what was real was the option of keeping their families together, of working together, and they saw the opportunity of benefiting from China's efforts of moving through Hunza as something that was important. So as I worked through this article, I tried very hard to listen to what people were experiencing and saying and understanding, how they were part of a life that is not determined. We have no idea what's going to happen, but being ready to shift and to change like a piece of willow, or what is it? There's a kind of bamboo. It gives way to the wind. And so maybe that's closer to the way that we live. In any case, it was an honor to write for the book, and thank you. Okay. Dr. Kamal?
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Julia. I would, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Nukhbah for giving us opportunity to express ourselves and to contribute in her book. And secondly, my contention is it is not religion or politics. The discrepancy between, not between religion or politics, but it is the culture. And then how I got this idea. I visited America many times after 9/11. I met different people, from different ethnicities, and I talked to them. They are not concerned with my religion or my political affiliations. What they were concerned was, how do I live and how do I behave? What is my culture? And then I suddenly realized that the conflict between East and the West, or North and the South, is not purely religion or not purely politics, but it is the major issue is culture. So because the West after 9/11 gave up their favorite, their very cherished idea of multiculturalism, and then they become ethnocentrism. They started following ethnocentrism. And then what I want to bring out was that it is what we need today is cultural relativism than ethnocentrism. You know that it is a kind of categorizing certain things, imposing certain image on a certain community. In my chapter, I talk about an incident in the Italian hospital, narrated by Gabriel Morency. He says that he went to a hospital to visit his friend Jamal, and an old man said, "Hey, here is a Muslim in this hall, in this hospital. Beware of him." He smiled, and when he brought Jamal to that old man, he said, he's a very good man, he helped me, he's a really nice person. But when he told him that, when Morency told him that he is a Muslim, he was a Muslim, then his attitude suddenly changed. It's not Islam, not politics, but it is a kind of fear that the demonizing of the Muslims in the West. Another incident another thing that I quoted was a Flossie's article that they were afraid that when these Muslims, if they gain power, they will destroy our culture. They won't give freedom to women. They won't give freedom to they won't allow to think freely. This I experienced myself in US also. I went to US on Fulbright scholarship for independence research on life and literature. I met some of the lawyers, women lawyers. They said that, look here, your religion, your culture did not give any freedom to the women. But I said, no, it is not so. It is some individuals or certain groups that do so, but neither Islam nor our constitution, politics, is different to the women's activity. Anyway, well, what I touch upon is, just as Dr. Nukhbah also mentioned, that to look at a religious group as a monolithic group. And if you look at Samuel Huntington's that clash of civilization, or what West call clash theory, in that Samuel Huntington look at the Muslims from all over the world as a one monolithic entity. But you know that, all of us know that Muslims in Pakistan even, they're not monolithic entity. We have different thoughts, different approach, different ideologies, different faith regarding Islam. So that again was a false idea. Again, the Bernard Lewis, he talked about the New Orientalism, and he termed Muslim as the Orientalist. I try to bring out all these issues, and then I said that it is, what if we want to adopt, if we want to become the world to become happy place and a place to worth living, then we must develop the vision of cultural relativism. Then I also discussed Mohsin Hamid's Reluctant Fundamentalist with reference to Chenge and his ideas. Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks Dr. Nukhbah for inviting me to write this chapter. I just wanted to say two things. One is about the conception, where the idea emerged from, and then how I executed it. So this was a very interesting class with one of my professors at SUNY Binghamton. The course was Politics and Forms of Art. And the professor was teaching State of Exception by Giorgio Agamben. And he wanted us to share some of the local examples of where probably state of exception is being operationalized. And drone strike phenomena in Pakistan, of course I was very much aware of that. So I'm talking about 2016. This was 2016 when this class was taking place. So I knew the idea, I was aware of that, but I was a bit hesitant to throw an idea which was so remote from the United States and probably was not even well developed in my own mind. But I took the risk, and I said that, I raised my hand and I said that, well, we in Pakistan have been experiencing probably one of the biggest drone operation in the world. And I think probably that is one manifestation of what we call state of exception. And my professor was so excited when he heard this comment, and he was like, well, Vakar, you must pursue this idea further. And then he pushed me to write a seminar paper on that, and then later on I presented at a conference, and luckily we have Dr. Sabah over here. So Dr. Sabah, myself, and Dr. Tahmina Pirzada. Three of us were in a panel. We presented our own papers, and we have Dr. Baba Harlow as the keynote. She also spoke on drone art, on drones in general, UAVs. Shazib was also there in the same conference. Dr. Wasim was there, and that was really good. So that was the beginning. Now, the paper itself, so basically my paper looks into the concept of nation state to begin with, and how after 9/11, the United States has experimented with the notion of nation state to produce some categories from within nation state which are meant to be transitional but have become permanent. So that transitional component is the component of executive orders, which in fact should have been in place only under the situations which were exceptional or emergency based. But with the 9/11, what has emerged is that, and that is what we see in the emerging global order as well, that what was taken to be an executive order to be executed under emergency situations, that very component has become normalized. So drone strikes, for example, were supposed to be, of course, product of an executive order, but they were supposed to be working for a limited time. But we have seen is that since 9/11, since they have started, they have been unfolding continuously, and there doesn't seem to be any end to that. So in my paper, I connected the idea of drone strikes with state of exception, and then I studied the representation of that in truck art. And the idea behind that was that truck art is quintessential Pakistani art, okay? And I discussed the truck art with reference to Jamal Ilyas to kind of unravel or expose the resistive potential of Pakistani truck art. So that was about the paper. Thank you.
Okay. My chapter in the book is actually the third one, and it looks at critiques of 9/11 policies. It looks at the ideas of terrorism as they're presented in the Patriot Act, what the Patriot Act was meant to do, how it was meant to stop terrorism, and then it compares the kind of realities that are imagined and depicted in, again, I think as many have mentioned before me, The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid, and also Homeboy by H.M. Naqvi. And I mean, I think my personal experience with this article is probably a little bit different from my colleagues. I was a student at FC College. This was actually my final thesis for my major as English and history is what I double majored in. And it did also, I mean, in one way or the other, I think it became my interest. It was part of the, may presentation please? It was part of this joint student-faculty collaboration and venture that Dr. Nukhbah took us on. Thank you, Bas. It was to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. It was between the Library of Congress and the Global Liberal Colleges Alliance. And Dr. Nukhbah actually had the idea of, well, why don't we examine 9/11? Because like Dr. Curry said, so this was 2013-14, right? So like Dr. Janelle Curry said, the understanding that we had of the past was, oh, there was a past before 9/11, and then somehow the world drastically changed right after 9/11, even though it's just, it's the US. But, that idea of history, that sort of bifurcation, that fragmentation into pre and post 9/11 world is what Dr. Nukhbah was interested in. I am now a Pakistan studies teacher. My general area is between 1500 to 1857. So, contemporary was a little strange for me, but literature was my passion. And I was so excited because I think terrorism and what is Muslim, understanding of Muslim identities is something that is important or has become important for all of us. And like Dr. Kamal said, you have Muslim, but it's not like one cohesive group. There's so many different kinds of Muslims. So what I chose to do was what I think I felt most comfortable with, which is let's examine text. And I looked at the Patriot Act. I looked at the way that it defined terrorism. I looked at the way that the amendment to the Pakistani Constitution defined terrorism. And I looked at the way that a terrorist was presented in both H.M. Naqvi and Mohsin Hamid's works. So my first section talks about just defining what terrorism is, just defining what racial profiling, stereotyping is. My second section sort of traces the evolution of the characters as they sort of become wary of the U.S. that once seemed warm and receptive suddenly turns cold in the post 9/11 world. What I think I end on is something that maybe resonates with me. I look like all of this situation, all this bangles, everything. I've been told, oh, you look Indian, which is fine. But then I sound like this, and it's weird, and it's always jarring when I walk into my Pakistan studies class. But I think what I took away from my research is what I think I concluded with my article, which is this idea of permeability. This idea that something of us is outside and something of the outside is within us. So Changiz, who is Mohsin Hamid's protagonist, goes abroad, comes back, and yet he cannot shake off the feeling that the US has altered him. It's the same with Naqvi's major character. And I think it's also the same with our understanding of terrorism, because before 9/11, when we thought of terrorism, chances are you thought, oh, Hindus or Indians, or you have so much violence among the different sects of Islam in Pakistan, you think of that as terrorism. But now all of a sudden we too have to evaluate, to draw a gun on the stereotype, this image of a mullah, maybe that's what a terrorist is. And I think all of that is just so fundamental to our understanding. But I do have, I think, a few images that I would really like to share. So that was our team. That is Bushra Jaswal. This is us at the airport, so I don't think any of us look great, but that's Bushra Jaswal, who was our chief librarian. I'm sure you all recognize Dr. Nukhbah. Tuba was my companion, and we also have Muawiyah Agli. That was the Library of Congress. It was such a wonderful experience, and I think it was also crucial towards shaping me as I hope I become a researcher one day, and also as I join part of the academic community. And it's so great to sit with people who once used to teach me. My experience, I think, is different because I wrote this as an undergraduate, and I am no longer an undergraduate. Now I am a teacher, and my writing has evolved, my interests have evolved. But contemplating Muslim identity, understanding ourselves as brown Muslims, etc., and understanding what our relationship is with the West is, I think, still a major concern. But as I look back on this now, I also see a lot of flaws because I've grown so much. It was 2014. It was my junior year when I started writing this. And part of me is always horrified, as I'm sure so many of us are, because we're all writers. It's the insecurity. But the other part is was thrilled when I got this book because I love the dedication in the front, which says, this is for those people who believe in building bridges despite the fact that they've been affected by something as horrific as 9/11. And I really, truly believe in building bridges, especially in the dark, scary times. I think the world's a scary place. And most of all, of course, this is me looking exceptionally happy. I'm not sure Dr. Nukhbah looks as happy to see me. But she was a wonderful mentor. I think I had multiple breakdowns while we were there, when I was writing, and then also and it's just really lovely to know that there is somebody who is supporting you and going to encourage you. And I think that's my experience with this text. And I hope I become better at writing and thinking and also hopefully teaching. So thank you so much. Yeah. I think we have some video recordings. Okay, so, sorry? Okay, this is Dr. Deborah Mitrakar.
Hello everyone, I'm Deborah Kaur. Thank you so much for inviting me for this book release. I'm sorry I cannot be with you here today, but believe me, all my thoughts and wishes are with you. And I'm so happy that you asked me to be there with you and you're allowing me to share my thoughts with you today. This book is a very important part of my scholarly career. The chapter that I wrote, Why They Hate Us, Rise of Fundamentalism After 9/11, was a part of my doctoral thesis, which was on conflict zone literature. And I'm forever grateful to Nukhbah ma'am, who helped me, who first invited me, then helped me to complete it, and so that it could be a part of this book. This book, I believe, would form an integral part in the discourse on 9/11 because of two reasons that I think of right now. The first is the inclusion of the literary along with the non-literary. As a student of English literature, I have always found that we tend to underscore the facts over fiction, though we know very well that facts are always compromised with truth, at least in our media-trodden post-truth global scenario. And when we remove fiction from our understanding, from our discourses, we actually forget how the human beings and humanity at large has suffered from any man-made or natural disaster. Secondly, I think this book is so important because though it speaks about 9/11, it actually tries to join all the various voices of South Asia, and which is so important. And I believe what we have tried to do is that we have tried to find out why there is so much of hatred today and how we can counter that hatred through our engagement with the literary and non-literary procedures. And this is so important because whenever we talk about South Asia, we talk about globalization, economy, and border security, and threats, and etc. In this entire process, what we forget is that there is an element of human suffering, and which should unite us all together, because ultimately it is love thy neighbor, as I said, is the only thing that can save humanity today from these terrible times. Hello everyone.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to follow that up with a video recording by Dr. Charles Ramsey.
Hello and greetings, assalamu alaikum. My warmest greetings to everyone there in Lahore and at Foreman Christian College and all the other participants in the book launch. My hearty congratulations to Dr. Professor Nukhbah. What a joy to be a part of this book. It came out so nicely, beautifully done, a nice cohesion in the chapters, and just a quick synopsis of what I was trying to do and say. Well, it came out of my experiences of someone who works in the social sciences and who is interacting with people across cultures, and I realized that in an era when people should be becoming more integrated, there should be more cooperation, I was actually seeing the opposite. People were fearful of collaborating because of suspicion. Now, a certain degree of suspicion is very important, and I talk about that, the work of Edward Said, and of course his very famous book, Orientalism, someone who I knew personally and had the joy of meeting some decades ago, but his influence is such that we are all rightfully suspicious, but we cannot allow that to cause us to have paralysis by analysis, something where we stop meeting others, hearing their ideas, and evaluating research upon its merits. So my study in this brief chapter was to look at how contemporary writers, particularly Muslim American writers, are evaluating the use of sources done by some of their mentors, the Orientalists, that meaning social scientists and professors in the humanities who are studying other cultures, who are stepping into other cultures, learning languages, traveling there, trying to understand what should be our position, our point of view relating to the validity of their research. And my simple answer is, well, we need to get to know them as people, and we need to understand what they are writing and how they came to that access. And as we build those relationships, A, our research will be better, we'll be more informed, but B, we'll find new avenues for collaboration. And so in a simple statement, that's what I'm advocating, is that we continue to step across boundaries, building collaborative research, and understand that yes, there is complexity, yes, there should be a degree of suspicion. We should be aware of our own biases and the biases of others, but let's not stop there. Now more than ever, we must keep moving forward. And that is the spirit, I think, of this book in general. It's a tremendous effort. I'm so thankful for each of you, and truly honored to be a part of this with you. My warmest greetings to everyone there. God bless, and I hope we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you. Those were some real pearls of wisdom regarding the very nature of research by Dr. Charles Ramsey. Dr. Halima Ali is not here with us today. However, she did send a written message, and one of our wonderful MPhil students, Nawaz, I believe, will be reading for us today her message.
The message reads, Assalamu alaikum and good day to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to pen a few words on this auspicious occasion. The chapter titled Bollywood Audiovisual Responses Towards 9/11 through Qurban and My Name is Khan by Halima Muhammad Ali was written by me upon the invitation of Associate Professor Dr. Nukhbah Taj Langa. The chapter encompasses the image of terrorism and Islam that is portrayed in Hindi movies. The Muslim other after 9/11 has become a peripheral figure and victimized in many non-Muslim countries. Thus, the plight of Muslims across the world produced this chapter. Qurban is set in the United Kingdom and My Name is Khan is set in the United States of America. Both movies have tried to draw a picture of the Muslims in the West but have failed to defend the rights of Muslims the way that the directors and producers set out to. This might be as well as the lack of expert advice from Muslim clerics and authorities. I have tried to explain this lack in the movies via my essay and have given suggestions on how this lack can be mended. It is an attempt to set straight ideas about Islam and terrorism that has been compartmentalized by the West especially and Bollywood as well. Hopefully, this chapter will help in enlightening the West and the world on who Muslims are and how and why they have been negatively portrayed via movies. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawaz. Dr. Marshall Saif is also not here with us today. However, she too sent a written message that will be read for us by another lovely student, Sara Azam.
Assalamu alaikum. My Marshall Saif chapter title is Pakistan's Traditional Muslim Scholar at the West Post 9/11. The message states, the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 have profoundly transformed the image of Islam in Western eyes. Individuals who are visibly Muslim, as identified by their clothes, the color of their skin, their location, etc., have been subject to Islamophobia as well as institutionalized monitoring and discrimination by Western and Muslim governments. Arguably, the group that has suffered the most are individuals who are viewed as terrorists or as having links with terrorists. Prime among them are traditional Muslim scholars, ulama in Pakistan. These individuals have been trained in and often teach at religious seminaries, madrasas, institutions that have been labeled as hotbeds of terrorism and have faced unparalleled scrutiny since the Twin Tower attacks. Despite the deep impact on these scholars and their tradition, very light work has been done on their experiences and responses to 9/11. My chapter pays close attention to Pakistani ulama and presents their views on the impact of 9/11 on their intellectual tradition, their fraternity, their institutions of learning, as well as on Islam, Pakistan, and the Muslim world. While a number of different ulama feature in this chapter, the focus remains on the view of leading Deobandi scholar Zahidur Rashidi. The chapter commences by providing some background on madrasas and ulama and the ways in which Western and Pakistani governments reacted to these scholars and institutions post 9/11. The chapter then launches into an examination of how Pakistani ulama have responded to these reactions. In particular, my work examines the ulama's and especially Rashidi's views on American foreign policy post 9/11. While highlighting many ulama's abiding suspicion of the West, this chapter also emphasizes Rashidi's nuanced perspective on the Muslim world's relationship with the West post 9/11. In particular, I draw attention to the convergence of opinion between Pakistani ulama and the American political left that is highlighted by Rashidi. In so doing, I call for a recognition of Rashidi's expansive intellectual horizons. Moreover, I argue that the starkly different ways in which Western leftist intellectuals and Pakistani ulama are perceived highlights deep-set Islamophobia. Thank you.
Sorry? Yeah. Thank you so much, Sara. I think that concludes our contributors panel, and that leads us into interdisciplinary responses to the book. The first person who will maybe share some of his thoughts with us is Dr. Saeed Shafkat. He is the Executive Director of the Center for Public Policy and Governance here, and I look forward to hearing what he has to say.
Thank you so much, Mubina and Dr. Nukhbah. I really don't know what to say, but there are three things that I want to sort of point out. Number one, I think it's an incredibly good job that Dr. Nukhbah has done in terms of developing an interdisciplinary perspective on a book and on a topic which has not received the kind of attention that it deserves. And I must say that for the first time in all these years, I have begun to really reflect that, yes, I should also be writing about this event and how it has really transformed, not only United States of America, but the world. And the reason I say this is because I'm a personal witness. I was there, and so was my lovely daughter who is sitting here. She was also there, and the day it happened, the trauma that one saw with your children is unbelievable, which cannot be captured in words, I must say that. But what is interesting and important, that I have been one of those fortunate people who have been going to US from 1975 onwards, and I have been there in every decade so far, and will probably continue to keep going as long as I live, because it is still a fascinating world. But the point that I want to convey to you is, again, it cannot be imagined what United States was prior to 2001 and what it has become today. I'm not passing any value judgment, but what I'm suggesting to you is that as a consequence of that, number one, we began to see new dimensions and understanding of security technology, which is again unprecedented and unbelievable. And the connectivity and globalization that we began to see. And now, in the post-2016 phase, you have a reversal of that. So this is something, again, a eye-opening kind of an exercise that one is witnessing in front of one's eyes. So therefore, what one needs to sort of recognize is that the changes that have taken place in the post-2001 period are changes which are of phenomenal nature. And those of you who really want to understand America prior to 2001, they need to see some of the movies which were, prior to 2001, and therefore have a different understanding of American culture, American politics, American social life, and that's really different and tough. The last point is basically on two presentations. We had Waqar Azim yesterday giving a talk at our center, and more importantly, the review of the book that was written by Abdullah. I thought that was one of the most comprehensive reviews, and all of you who have made comment and critique, it is a significant contribution in terms of really appraising and giving a sense of understanding why it is not simply an event, but a transformational process that has started in 2001. It has affected the globe. It is not ending. America may have succeeded in containing terrorism within its borders, but it is live, and therefore there's a need to have better understanding and appreciation. Thank you so much about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Said Shafkat. Next, we would love to hear the thoughts of our distinguished Professor of History and Dean of Social Sciences, Dr. Sakandar Hayat.
Thank you so much for inviting me and Dr. Nukhbah. I'm so grateful for this privilege and honor. I wish I could have contributed a chapter to this book myself. You never asked and I never said no. And why I'm saying this is because I think one of the regions that affected 9/11 the most in Pakistan was Northwest Frontier Province. And I think that perspective is somehow missing here. That would have really completed the work. Because, it was the frontier which was in the eye of the storm for a very long time. And those responses and the way people reacted, I'm sure would have enriched this book still further. But I'm just kidding. Anybody could have written better than I could. Now, this book, as you have all heard, or what the speakers so far, is about literary, non-literary, and cultural responses, although it has a sprinkling of politics also. It's about contemporary world history through culture, through literature, through religion, movies, art, and political developments, including the status of marginalized communities like Christians and regions like the northern regions of Pakistan. While all this helps to contribute to a better understanding of 9/11 and its legacies, for better or for worse, I can't go beyond one or two remarks. Given the time constraints, I have only got 5 minutes at my disposal. The wisest thing for me to do was to say thank you so much and get down. But out of deference and respect to my worthy colleagues for having invited me, trusted me to say a few words, I'll talk about Huntington's clash of civilization thesis. That is the subject which has been discussed in so many chapters, has been referred to, if not discussed in some detail, and also constitutes the main bulk of the foreword written by Dr. Parvez Hudbhai. So let me, address this question very, very briefly. Of course, it pertains to East-West or Islam-West relationship. Ironically, nobody took Samuel P. Huntington and his book, The Clash of Civilizations, and the remaking of the world order, which came out in 1996-97, seriously, till 9/11. And I have been a student of Huntington myself, not like Dr. Saeed Shafkat, my friend and colleague here, when we were studying in America, studying in political science and comparative politics. His book then, which came out in 1969, Political Order in Changing Societies, was the Bible for us if we had to qualify our comprehensive exams in comparative politics. And both of us have been reading Huntington for a very long time, so we're a little familiar with the kind of stuff he has been writing. But nothing shook up this world really like this book, The Clash of Civilization, which in my own personal humble opinion, Huntington himself did not take very seriously, because it was first published in the form of an article, which came in a semi kind of journal, not really a journal, Foreign Policy, which doesn't have much of referencing and notes and all that. And I wouldn't be impressed if one of my students comes to me and says, okay, I wrote an article and for foreign policy and it was very well researched, because that's not the purpose of that. It's more of a magazine or a semi-journal. So I think he was just, kind of, probing basically, essentially the ideas he was trying to check, he was trying to lead on the people. But given the response, of course, this became a serious project with him, and he wrote this book. But I'm still convinced, even when he worked very hard, and he worked very hard on this book, no question about it, talking about 8 civilizations, in such a systematic framework, it was essentially a polemical response, in my opinion, to Francis Fukuyama's End of History. You see, he wasn't still, coming up with something of his own to offer. It was more in the shape of a response from one, high-flying academic intellectual to another intellectual. What did he say, Huntington, then, after all? Huntington argued that while the collapse of Soviet communism had brought to an end the ideological disputes, it did not signify the end of history, because that's what Fukuyama said. He said, that's it, it's over. And the next book, if you read Fukuyama, is not even talking of human history, he's talking of robots. So I think that was the kind of response Huntington had, that, life still goes on. Henceforth, and, like he's telling Fukuyama, if it's the end of politics and if it's the end of economics, it's not the end of the world. Because he says, henceforth, culture, not politics or economics, would dominate and divide the world. Culture. He listed 8 cultures: Western, Confucian, Japanese, Islamic, Hindu, Slavic, Orthodox, Latin American, and perhaps African. Why did he say perhaps African? Because he was still not sure if Africa was a civilization. Each of these 8 civilizations embodied different value systems symbolized by religion, which Huntington argued was, quote, perhaps the central force that motivates and mobilizes people. The central force that motivates and mobilizes people. They're political scientists. It's not politics, but it's religion. The major divide was between the West and the rest, because only the West valued, and these are his words again, I quote, individualism, liberalism, constitutionalism, human rights, equality, liberty, the rule of law, democracy, and free market, unquote. Therefore, the West, he argued, must be prepared to deal with these rival, competing civilizations. The 2 most menacing civilizations, of course, were Islam and Confucianism. And if these 2 were ever to unite, they would pose a threat, a serious threat, to the Western core of civilization. For Huntington, the difference among civilizations are not only real, but they are basic. Civilizations are differentiated from each other by history, language, culture, tradition, and most importantly, religion. Interestingly, Huntington's thesis is indeed what I call intellectually the return of civilization, an argument made for a very, very long time, but perhaps more powerfully made by one British historian, Ornell G. Toynbee, writing somewhere, he started giving lectures in the 1920s and things started coming out in the 1930s. He was writing in 1940s. In fact, volume 6 of his book, a classic book now as we know it, A Study of History, came out in 1939. He wrote some 12 volumes, and the last volume, of course, appeared in 1961, and it was a very, very popular study for postgraduate students and so-called intellectuals, at least in this part of the world, in the 50s and in the 60s. In fact, it was in the 60s that I happened to read this book for the first time when I myself was a student of history at Peshawar University. In this, this person, this professor, a towering figure of civilizational analysis, he discussed some 21 civilizations. 15 of them dead, old civilization, and 6 were contemporary civilization. And these civilizations included some of those which, of course, were mentioned by Huntington. But unlike Huntington, and that's the point I want to make, unlike Huntington, he believed in equal value of all civilizations, an equal value of all civilizations, and considered the total human experience from earliest times to the present as an ongoing project on civilization. He renounced, Huntington of course disagreed, he renounced the idea of a universal civilization very clearly in his work and stressed the separate fault lines, what he called the fault lines, especially the Islamic and Confucian, separating the Western civilization from those of Asia. He regarded Islam in particular the greatest threat to the present time. He refused to see a difference between Islam, a religion of peace that has remained the same, and the Muslims. He refused to distinguish the two. He did not see a difference between Islam and Muslim history, which is peculiar to people and places. Worse, Huntington tied Islam with violence. Huntington's thesis has been criticized on many accounts. Criticized his thesis, critiqued his thesis many times in the classroom, way back when I was teaching courses on politics. But in the process, he did succeed in one way, that Huntington created what I call a clash of scholarship. So many scholars taking, opposite positions, diametrically opposed positions. I wouldn't like to go into the details of it. This is not the occasion to go into detail. I would only point out 3 major flaws in Huntington's thesis of clash of civilizations. And one, the major critique that, and generally this has been discussed among many scholars, and I'm trying to sum that up, how he has been critiqued across the board. The most important criticism or critique is epistemological in nature. Epistemological in the sense that he is a realist and he is an Orientalist in his approach. That's the epistemological critique. Then there is the methodological critique also in his work, and that is that he is being reductionist and monolithic, like some of my colleagues have already talked about it, in considering Islam and the followers of Islam essentially to be some kind of a monolith. And Dr. Curry also talked about the homogeneity, assuming that this is one homogeneous community. Of course, Islam is one, but the Muslim community is so different and so diverse and with so, kind of conflicting interests at times. And if you have a little, sense of history, which I'm sure Huntington had plenty of it, you would have seen that, what happened in India, for instance, in those good old days, Muslim rulers fighting Muslim rulers. You see, it's not that the Muslim rulers were fighting Hindu rulers. And in one of the most dramatic turns in Muslim history is that when in Iran you see the rise of the Safavid dynasty, and the Ottomans, who are ruling the Anatolia and Turkey, they got scared. And they almost ceased their mission of going into Europe. They stopped at Hungary and they turned back to the Middle East because they want to stop the spread and the influence of the Safavid Empire in the Arab world in the Middle East. So, I mean, how could you treat the Muslim community, even at their worst, when they're fighting with each other as one, solid monolith. So that's the methodological part, and I think there is more serious critique of Huntington in the sense, in this clash of civilization, which I consider is ethical in nature, that his clash of civilization is a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, which of course we saw soon in the shape of the outbreak of 9/11. Thus, to conclude, let me say, the 9/11 attacks validated, so to speak, this clash of civilization between Islam and the West, resulting in this lingering Islamophobia as we understand the term today. So I should stop here, and I'll recommend once again this wonderful chapter on Islamophobia written by none other than Dr. Nukhbah, Islamization and post-9/11 Islamophobia. You should read that chapter for yourself. It's a very interesting, very informative, and a very thought-provoking chapter. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Sikandar Hayat. And I think you're very right in pointing out that one of the worstly affected communities is the Pashtun community. And I'm sure Dr. Nukhbah will find something else. And if not, you have already volunteered yourself. So with that, I would like to request Dr. Wasim Annu, who is again a professor of English here at Foreman Christian College and University, to just sort of let us know what he thinks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all. And the first thing I should say is congratulations to Dr. Nukhbah and all the contributors, of course. So back to the humanities, and that's my perspective. I don't have to brief actually what humanities is about, but we know that culture is a very important component to that. That also humanities is closest to what we all hold spirit about liberal arts education. So both combined, of course, put us in a paradox. Where is it that we live now? In many ways, I could see the book actually in a very T.S. Eliottian term. In my end is my beginning. So I read it chapter-wise chronologically, but I interpreted it in a reverse gear. Arts. So how actually arts, both in literary and non-literary forms, influences or got to influence. In that context, the book appears to me not only interdisciplinary, but I see this, that could be very sensitively my own reading, but I see it cross-disciplinary much, because we live in the age of biodiversity and humanities digitization. I also see many spaces there in terms of transdisciplinary, where things we may say are not clearly defined, but I think we have researchers to look deeper into and to maybe define or redefine. One of the best ways could be like very physical demonstration of the book title itself. You can see boxes, but there are boxes within boxes. There is art within art. So I think the researchers, the future researchers actually, need to read between the lines, close reading, and maybe looking at art forms very closely. Because I think the messages are very deep. For me, the book appears to be, and that is like my reading of it, asking. It is asking a lot. And if you, and rightly pointed out, of course, we have great political scientists sitting here, and I am nobody to comment actually what 9/11 is or was. But I think that being a moment where I remember Virginia Woolf saying, something changed at the turn of the century. Well, we know that something was actually that changed, yet we don't know. Still, there are many somethings. So 9/11 is just a moment, an event. And that it is multidimensional actually, but definitely leading us to reading history on both the dimensions. There is a pre to 9/11 and there is a post to 9/11. Do they collaborate? Do they give us chance to look into both the sides? Perhaps that's the job of the researchers. Also, we can look the same way through Orientalism. There is pre and there is post. And I keep saying I think we are living in post. So we need to actually look into how these posts are to be addressed. They are, of course, in many terms periodization, but I think there are many other ways of determining periodization. That the book is basically a question raiser is the most important aspect of this book. And that art becomes a means for it to explore the end is again something that we got to be very sensitive about. I don't have to get into details, but I think we all know, those who read, that Kamaluddin's article challenging Huntington, the controversies, and talking about the multi-layeredness, which of course is unending, even in terms of ethnographies. And same can be said about Ramsey's article about Orientalism, that there is good and there is bad. And I think it's the researcher's job to trace the good or the bad. And then, of course, Langha has picked on policies and its problematization, and how actually Muslims at times are perceived myopically. That 9/11 is a moment for changing perceptions is something that the researchers of humanities have to pick on, whether literary or non-literary. I particularly mention the introduction, of course, is very elaborative. At times it gives the sense that, okay, you don't have to read the book because everything is there. But then I think the most interesting for me was the conclusion, where I think the real details about how art perceives or offers perceptions for such historic moments. And I think that's very important. That's the way we, the humanities people, need to look deeper into it. Of course, it can be philosophized, Twin Tower itself. But I think for me, and that's my reading of the book, that it just asks us, there are so many critical dimensions that open up with the book. But this one, the affect theory, reading trauma, tragedy, and the transformations that happen or may happen out of it. That, of course, leads to us as humans and our states of being. Of course, cultures here connect with ontology. And ontology that definitely lives in us in terms of our emotions and feelings that we hardly give time to read to. Such, of course, is the critical reflection that comes for me from this book. If it doesn't change the sensibility, at least it moves us with our perceptions. Maybe if we not correct our dimensions, we change them. So, with art, literature, and non-literature, what we are left with is a ground zero that reminds us of the Twin Tower, to make us realize that we all actually need to use spaces to read more, to research more, to do more. So, I would highly recommend this book and would like Dr. Nukhbah to really celebrate it for the humanities, because I think researchers find spaces here. Please read and find your spaces. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Wasim Anwar. Dr. Kamaluddin, if you'd like to share your note of thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you who have graced this occasion, particularly Dr. Tabby. He has to go because he had some other appointments and a preoccupied appointment. Then I would like to thank Dr. Saeed Shafkat and Dr. Sikandar Hayat for taking out time. And I am very grateful to my dearest friend, Dr. Wasim Anwar, for sharing his opinions, sharing his ideas with us. And I would like all the participants, the guests in particular, and my dear colleagues, my dear students, thank you for gracing this occasion. And I simply say now, thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be the moderator for this. And I don't think we have any time left, but we do still have a tea in which room? E21. If you have any questions or you have any comments, we would love to hear them. And with that, over the tea for sure.